Okay, if everyone would take their seats, we will get started. Okay, it is now 7:04. This meeting is now called to order. Please rise for O Canada. Okay, and now we will sing the Western song.
W's up! Western, Western, Western U, College Fair and Square. Arts and meds are strong for you, deny it if you dare. Here we go now. Western, 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 college is the best, come and write a show. Cause this U is our U, and for her we'll strive to do our best to fight with might and main. What's Maine? We will always adore her, our alma mater, Western School of Fame. And when the team goes marching down the field, you know the team will never ever yield. The other team has lots of pep, lots of pep. The CR team, they'll know they're out of step. And when the game goes down in history, history, it's another Western victory. Victory, cheers go out for Western U, Western U. Rah, 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 to the right, rickety, rickety, blue, oh, blue, rickety, rackety, rackety, roo. High up, sky up, Western U, WESTERN, 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 woo!
And now for the land recognition. Western University is situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Luna Pewauk, and Attawandaron peoples, who have long-standing relationships to the land and region of southwestern Ontario and the City of London. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and Munsee Delaware Nation. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. Western values the significant historical and contemporary contribution of local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island, North America. You may now be seated. Yeah. Okay, polls are now open. So just as well as the clicker roll call, we've also in the past, the September meeting, we had a bit of troubles with the clickers as far as roll call goes. So I'm just going to be doing an actual physical attendance sheet as well, just to make sure to see if all the clickers are working. So when I call your name, please just shout out present. Thank you. And if you're a proxy, please just wait for the name of the person that you're here for. Okay. Adair? Present, just shout out present. Okay, Hugo? Okay. Al Shamil? Thank you. Kular? Thank you. Anthony? Apple? Thank you. Batchtold? Baldwin? Barroso? Campbell? Dinesi? Fernandez? Fiaz? Foreman? Fung? Hollenberg?
Present.
Thank you. Hunter?
Here.
Kamenetsky?
Here.
Larocque Charvet? Okay. Lawler? Lou?
Here.
Ma? Malioko?
Present.
Marfil? Marginian? Macaulay? Oh, yeah, thank you. Macaulay here. Okay, McGee?
Here.
Murray?
Here.
O'Connor? Polster? Potter?
Here.
Raja? Rokesi?
Here.
Sawyer?
Here.
Salmani?
Here.
Stebbing?
Here.
Sun?
Here.
Teja?
Present.
Tina?
Here.
Thacker, sorry. No? Okay. Van Galen?
Here.
Vezina?
Here.
Watson?
Here.
Woodside?
Here.
Yan?
Here.
Pratt?
Here.
Chang?
Here.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I did call you, but I got you. I'm sorry, what is going on? I'm going to have to ask all of you to leave, please. Oh. Yeah. Excuse me, all of you with the signs, I'm going to have to ask you to put the signs away. Please. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I do have a few comments this evening. Okay, so first of all, you might be wondering who this is to the left of me. This is Daniel Petrov, our Deputy Speaker. We will be ratifying him this evening, and at which point he'll do a bit of a spiel about himself. Secondly, at AGM, there was a policy binder that was approved, but 3 policies were missed. One of them was the policy that removes the speaking rights from the executive resource members. So that would be the SPO, the Secretary-Treasurer, and the Communications Officer. So as that policy technically does not exist currently for this meeting, the executive resource members have speaking rights during our debate period, but they still don't have voting rights. And I also just wanted to remind everyone that point of information, point of personal privilege, or point of order does not need recognition from me, so you can go ahead and just make those points at any time. And also, no crosstalk, so no directed comments to any of the other councillors. And finally, you may see there's an extra camera this evening. There is a school project that is being conducted. It's just going to remain there. Our meetings are public anyways and being recorded for YouTube, so I didn't see any issue with this. Okay, and that's all that I have for my comments. So we'll move on to the, Councillor Hollenberg had a point of personal privilege that he wanted to bring up.
Thank you, Joshua Hollenberg, Law Counselor. So in January 29, 2018, during a separate labor dispute between one of the unions and the administration, this council voted as a policy to not take sides and to remain neutral and to act strictly in the best interest of these students. As such, the existence of promotional materials on the council table, I think, creates either bias or the real perception of bias. And as such, I believe that pursuant to our policies, they should be gathered up and removed from the council table, possibly put to the side.
Okay. Does anyone object to this being done? Councillor Malioko?
I can speak to this for discussion because I planned on bringing it up anyways, if you would prefer to have that time there. I wholeheartedly object with even the policy that USC should remain objective or quote unquote neutral on this issue. I believe that neutrality doesn't exist in this scenario. So if you would like for me to elaborate on that now, I can.
I think we'll save that for the discussion. Great. Thank you. If there are no other objections, though, if the majority of council would like these to be collected, we will collect them at this time. So if you wouldn't just mind passing it to the right of you around the table. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we will now move on to our consent agenda. So hopefully you all were able to see the excerpt in our agenda that outlined what a consent agenda is and how it's carried out. For those of you who potentially didn't get the chance to read that, a consent agenda is basically used to vote on non-controversial items without discussion, so it's basically just unanimous consent. So at this time, I will ask if there are any items that a councillor would like to have removed from the consent agenda. Councillor McCauley?
One of the policies that is listed as being struck down was removed by the Governance and Finance Committee, and this is an improper version that still contains it, so the environmental sustainability policy shouldn't be included in that list. And then otherwise, the rest of it was approved by Governance and Finance.
So the environmental sustainability policy was not
Approved by Governance and Finance.
okay. So you would like council to debate that separately?
I think we would prefer it just not
To go back
be
to the
removed.
standing committee? Or just not?
Or just to stay.
Okay.
It was noticed and consented by the associate governance who had initially prepared the list that it was put there in error.
Okay.
And we believe that there's no reason it should be removed.
Okay.
I believe
I can speak to that.
Sure.
So I'm Keaton Olson, the associate governance. It was just a clerical error. It's not supposed to be there.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, any other items that should be removed from the consent agenda? Okay. Okay, so are there any objections to the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, I will take it as unanimously approved. I will need a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Ocasey, Councillor Ashamil, thank you. It's unanimously approved. Okay, we will move on to the approval of tonight's agenda. Are there any amendments? Councillor Sawyer?
Yeah, I'd like to motion to remove the executive reports from the agenda and have them distributed separately after the meeting.
Okay, I'll need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Batchtold. Are there any objections to this motion? Councillor Foreman?
Jared Foreman, Social Science President. I think it's important that we hear exactly from the executive what they've been doing over the past month. There's a lot of work that gets done over that time.
Okay, seeing as there was an objection, we will vote on this. All those in favor of removing the executive reports from the agenda this evening? Okay, that is not majority, so they will remain on the agenda. Any other amendments to the agenda? Councillor Van Galen.
Hi, Councillor Van Galen, Health Studies. I would like to motion to add a minute or two of silence in recognition of the fact that November 11th is coming up, and we will not have another remembrance, like another meeting before then or close to after then, and it's more appropriate to do it now than at the end of October, or November, sorry.
Is there a point in the agenda where you would like this to happen?
I think probably before presentation, so directly after the approval of the agenda.
Okay. I'll need a seconder, sorry, for that motion. Councillor Hollenberg. Any objections to the addition of a minute of silence? Okay, that's approved. Any other amendments? Okay, I have one just for the motion for the ratification of the Deputy Speaker. President Pratt has come forward as the mover of this motion. Any objections to that? I need a mover and a seconder. Councillor Van Galen, Councillor Ocasey. Thank you. Okay. I will need a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended. Councillor Foreman, Councillor Fernandez. Thank you. And great, we will move on to the approval of the minutes from our last meeting. I'll look for a mover and a seconder to approve those minutes. Councillor Anthony and Councillor Baldwin. Any objections to those minutes? Okay, great, they are approved. At this time, we will have our minute of silence. Please rise. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we will now move on to the presentations this evening, starting off with governance revival from our Secretary Treasurer.
Okay. Great. So I'll try to keep this as short as possible, everyone. I just wanted to give you guys a quick update on Governance Revival. So Governance Revival is, you can just click to the next one. Yep. So Governance Revival was the project that I presented to the July 2018 Board of Directors meeting. I mentioned it in the summer council meeting a lot more in depth, and then I also mentioned it at the last meeting a little bit, but I just want to keep everyone sort of up to date, and if anyone has any questions or wants to get involved, they'll have all the information there. So yeah, it's basically just a project that I presented, and it was introduced then, and it's just based on the decision to prioritize governance for this year, because governance is a really important part of any organization, and ensuring that it is the most effective as possible is the goal of this. So in the first step in the process is data gathering. So this occurred partially through the consulting aspect, which was Pillar Consulting came through in the summer and did a council session. They also did a council session last year. So that's one of the ways that we've been collecting data on how to improve our governance and how different people in different aspects of the organization think about governance and think about how the way the USC runs. So that was one aspect of data gathering. The other is an internal gap analysis that we are conducting with the HR department, and that's more about internal governance, and our senior manager of human resources is doing that and seeing where we can improve our governance from within. And the last item is the research document compilation, and this just involves a series of data and collection and research, and that's done through different discussions, through reading different documents, and kind of coming up with one comprehensive document on all the governance within the organization and sort of what works, what doesn't, what could be improved, and all the information there. So this will occur throughout the entire year. We've done some data gathering, and we've used that information to do the next step of the process, but data gathering is continuing to happen until the end of the year, where we can use that information to further improve our governance. The second thing is the proposed methods. So the first thing that you've seen is policy changes. So you saw a bunch of policies just pass through the consent agenda, and that's because my associate governance, Keaton, has been working all summer on improving the clarity of our policies as much as possible and making sure that they are as easy to read. And on top of that, he is still continuing to work to finish the council policies through the working group and make those kinds of changes. And next semester, we'll be looking at more in-depth changes than just the grammatical and administrative ones that we've done so far. So stay tuned for that. And there is a working group that is also part of looking at those policies and passing them through. The next thing is working groups. So we talked about this a little bit last time, but that was one of the things that came out of our pillar session, and that's basically that working groups would sort of improve the culture at council and ensuring that everyone can kind of get involved about what they're passionate in small areas, getting in small groups and working towards a specific goal was seen as a better way to do things for certain projects. And so we piloted a couple working groups. So far we have the referendum fee review working group, we have the environmental sustainability working group, and we have the policy review working group. And it's just a really great way for councilors to sort of get in small groups, work towards a common goal, and pass that through a committee and then to council. And the last thing is enhanced training. So we're just thinking about ways that we can improve training and ensure that everybody sort of understands the structure of the USC. One of the ways we did that is through the USC 102 presentation in the summer and the USC 101 presentation in the summer and the USC 102 presentation that was done at the last meeting. On top of that, we had the resource fair that Mitch organized so that counselors and board members and associations coordinators could get together and meet each other and talk about how the USC functions in different ways. And that was also something that we found would be something we want to pilot this year and see how that goes. The last stage is future input. And so that's after all the data gathering has been completed and once we've reflected on the proposed methods for this year. And that's just basically leaving something that will continue the legacy of the project in the future years. So yeah, any questions based on that? Yes.
Just a question. Has the governance portfolio considered ungendering the governance and bylaw documents to make the governance more accessible?
Do you want to answer that? Which?
Mitch Pratt, UC president. I think it's per the Queen or some royalty like that. I think for some reason that we write the bylaws in that sense. I think Andrea, you can speak to that.
I
as well.
really don't know
Okay.
much about that, but
No,
we
we
will
can
look into
do
it
that.
and get back with that information on if that's possible. Any other questions?
Counselor,
Point of information, like we could ungender them pretty easily. Yeah, I just didn't want to touch that too much since it's just different for every policy. I didn't feel like it wouldn't materially affect how it reads. Considering like we are in Canada, it is like one of the accepted ways to write them.
Counselor Yee, did you have a question? No, you're good. Okay.
Any other questions? I will bring that discussion to governance and finance with Keaton and discuss it there, if everyone is okay with that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay. We will now move on to our second presentation, CHRW Radio Western, presented by A. Barton, the station manager.
It worked. That's good news.
Happy Halloween, everybody. So first of all, Radio Western would like to recognize the University Students' Council for all their efforts so far this year, but especially with that incredible success of Purple Fest. Pulling it all together on short notice, bringing in Lil Uzi Vert, which I will admit made me personally feel extremely old and out of touch. I've been a hip-hop guy for as long as I can remember. I've been playing records out for like 17 years. So now I know everything there is to know about SoundCloud rap. So thank you very much, USC. That is good stuff. But most of all, bringing together a lot of students across all faculties for a successful event on short notice was incredible. So excellent work. Thank you. And especially for the SoundCloud rap part. That's some cool stuff. Today we're going to go through some facility changes at Radio Western, changes to our programming, fundraising, advertising, our current volunteer participation, and what's going to be on the horizon. So in January, we'll be presenting our budget for fiscal 2020, alongside some hard metrics when it comes to our web presence, social media, and engagement with our audience. But we'll move on to slide 2. It's going to be difficult to see, and I am a terrible photographer, so I'll do my best to explain what's going on here. On the left is a photo of our technical director, Tim Glasgow, and myself on my first day on the job at Radio Western as the program director in 2015. So hired as a PD, but I do have some skills with the soldering iron as well. So here we are bringing in new wiring for the on-air console. So notice, if you can, maybe the concrete floor in there. There is a cable rack up near the ceiling and some gaudy green paint that looks all patched together. Not exactly the best kind of condition. When I started with Radio Western as a volunteer in 2005, it looked the same. So from 2005 up until 2015, we were in that gaudy green room doing what we needed to do. but not exactly the most inviting place. So after 3 years, management changes, a referendum, several other roadblocks, we've finally been able to update the facility and provide a much better atmosphere to broadcast from. So if you can see on the left-hand side, maybe, we don't have a concrete floor anymore. That paint is out of there. We treated the walls with the acoustic paneling, and it sounds incredible in there. I'm very happy with the work that's been done, and our volunteers are extremely happy with that work. But over the next few slides, I'm going to shed a little bit of light on how much work there is involved in bringing Radio Western back from the dark ages. All right, so let's move to slide 3. So there is our broadcast console with the hood up and still fully loaded. There is an incredible amount of dirt and grime on there. It's hard exactly to see, but you'll see as we go through the pictures. Especially the frequently used channels on that board, they get pretty dirty. So the next slide is the console fully unloaded. Each individual channel removed. You can see at the bottom of the chassis there's a ton of dirt, grime, and gross stuff, weird hairs and random things that have accumulated. We actually did an aesthetic clean of that in 2015, pulled all the channels out and got everything out of there. So that's 3 years worth of weird stuff in there. So let's move over. Back to life, all right? So clean chassis, clean hood. The hood of the console had all kinds of tape, stickers, and terrible things that took forever to scrub off of there. When I sent this picture to my program director to say, hey, you know, here's some of the work that we've had done, she asked me if we bought a new hood for the console. So that was a lot of grime and bringing it back to life. So we'll move to the next slide there. So this is where we get a little more technical. So for each individual channel, every single piece of electronics needed to be removed from there in order to clean the casing for the channel. And then we have all those sliders, right, that control the volume for each individual channel. We had to actually crack the cases on there. And that's a cracked fader on the left-hand side. And if we take a look on the right-hand side there, that is 10 years worth of dirt, dust, grime, and very strange things that have accumulated in there. Those faders hadn't been serviced since we actually installed the board way back 10 years ago. So we move on to the next slide. There were even some purple stars inside those faders, right? So somebody was throwing confetti in the studio, got it, not a good thing to do. But at least there wasn't any damage from drinks and that kind of thing being in there. Good stuff. So we'll move over to slide 8. There it is, serviced, loaded, cleaned up. It took our technician and myself about 24 hours over 2 days to be able to go through each individual channel, clean it out, and bring it all back to life. Such an improvement in the studio, it is a big deal. So finally, after not being serviced and maintained for a lot of years, actually been able to catch ourselves up, especially with the On-Air Studio, which is cool. Next slide is our lobby. We used to have nothing but fluorescence in there for as long as I could remember. It was a pretty cold, uninviting place, broken equipment, stickers, beat up furniture, filing cabinets. It had a very indie vibe, which was, the aesthetic for the 90s, sure. But we really needed to make a big change with the lobby. So we felt a refresh of the facilities, even just aesthetically, make a really big impact for us from volunteer recruitment and the buy-in from our volunteer base. Keep things clean and keep it in working order. So those aesthetic changes alone has made a major impact on morale, and we see more smiling faces and volunteers that are generally excited to get into the facility than we have before. So we'll move on to slide 10. Most of our computer systems and network infrastructure was installed way back in 2004. We desperately needed to bring ourselves up to 2018. So we did this by a lot of hours spent by our technician, removing barriers to connectivity from a network perspective, which is a difficult thing to do inside of the USC here. So once we got the network cleaned up and brought in 11 new Macintosh computers, many of which have an audio interface directly attached to them with a microphone, that enables our volunteers, the network stuff enables our volunteers especially to be able to share documents, share audio files, all that kind of stuff across the network, and increased efficiency there. But having proper working, maintained equipment, those computers, that's a good thing for us and made volunteer participation that much easier. Coming up in December, we have a full rewire and calibration in the production studio, and that's going to bring its specs up basically to compete with any full-blown recording studio in southwestern Ontario. opening up opportunities for students to create and gain production experience, even going as far as recording, mixing, and mastering an entire project to be released if that's something that they want to do from start to finish. So being able to do that in the analog domain is a pretty good thing. Very different than digital, and it teaches a very different skill set that applies if you want to get into that industry especially. Newsroom needs some aesthetic work done too. We've got all kinds of plaques, pictures, and news and sports awards from the past to put up and make the newsroom even more inviting for our volunteer base. And our tech room as well, where we house a lot of our technical equipment. While still in flux during a lot of the production work, it needs to be cleaned, cleared out. We just completed an audit on all of our capital equipment, so our focus now is to remove, sell, and donate some of our old stuff that doesn't hit the cap anymore. And a really cool thing is the Chippewa of the Thames are opening a new radio station, and we're hoping to be able to provide them with some of our equipment to kind of give them a fresh start there. We do have a lot of stuff that would apply to a small station just getting started, which is what we would love to do. So we'll move on. Programming, there's a lot of info on here, but I'll do my best. Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to midnight is a big change for us. It's now approximately 52% of that programming, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to midnight, student-led. That's coming up from the low 30s in 2015. So that is a very big change for us. We recognize the cyclical demands of our student volunteers. We have 3 terms, classroom hours, exams, and holidays being a really big impact on their involvement. So opening up more appropriate slots for students has been a big focus for us. We've typically in the past used overnight blocks for training. You know, come in between 2 and 6 a.m. and nobody's listening to you anyway, so just get in there and do the thing, right? But it's not exactly the best spot for somebody to come in to train because they don't have the support of staff being in there. So opening up slots between, 7 a.m., midnight, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. when we have staff in the station has made it a lot easier for our student volunteers to be successful when they have the support in there. I tell you, 2 to 6 a.m. is a fun slot to do, but it's very difficult to be able to pull them in with the demands of school and all that kind of thing. Tune-up is something new for us. Drive time slots are very important for a radio station, the AM and PM drive. If you listen to any other radio station, they're only live typically in those time periods. So for us, it's a big focus. We're live 24/7, but we want to do our best to bring up those drive times and have more student involvement there. So pure student-led programming, 4 to 6 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and we have an undergraduate committee consisting of students from Comp Sci, Social Sci, English, Engineering, and FIMS that select relevant music to students across genres, playlist the show in conjunction with the host. So the newest music that's coming into the Radio Western is processed and playlisted first. So our hopes are to develop this into a flagship student-led program, and we can broadcast that across campus eventually. We have more student musician exposure in those slots as well, including live-to-air broadcasts. Unfortunately, and I'm sure some of you in this room have had classes in UCC 146, has classroom bookings for every day for us except for Tuesday in that slot. So Tuesdays we can bring in a full band and rock the house, but every other day we got to bring in acoustic musicians. But it gives us a good line to be able to get students in to perform in a time frame that isn't early in the morning, late at night, right in the middle of the afternoon in a student-led show. So we added some new special days of programming too last year. So Indigenous Day Radio in June and Word Up, a celebration of hip-hop culture in August. And that falls around hip-hop's birthday. So every one of these dates is 24 hours worth of programming that's all produced by our volunteers for a specific cause or something to celebrate. So these two new days add to our previous 3, which is All Gay All Day in July, All Black Everything in February, and All Women's Voices, which is coming up here in December. We move to the next slide. Some really big changes and some good stuff happening in our news and sports department. Over 200 newscasts so far in 2018. That is on track every Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. Our focus is really on Western stories first, then local, national, and international stories that are sometimes international stories that are relevant to students. So 18 different volunteers involved with those newscasts. Most of them are undergraduates. And over last year's sports season, we put 65 games to air, including traveling with the teams for some big championship wins in the UTEC Bowl and both the Yates and Vanier Cups. We also put the entire Women's U Sports Championships that were held here at Western on the air. So that included teams from coast to coast. Student-led coverage over the summer, too. Rogers Cup, Honda Indy, and the Ontario Summer Games. The Ontario Summer Games were actually held here in London, which was a very different thing for us. We typically kind of folded sports in the summer, but this year we were able to push right through and have coverage of things that, you know, would be relevant to students, but also giving student volunteers the experience there so that they're better prepared when they come back in, or when they get ready to go with us in September too. So, alongside that, we're expanding our coverage too, and we've included reports on soccer, rugby, rowing, water polo, lacrosse, cross country, softball, baseball, tennis, field hockey, and golf, supporting more student athletes than we ever have before. Fundraising goal this year is $15,000. Currently, we're at about 10% of the goal. The campaign is actually going to run all the way through until June, and perhaps even further if we need to. Our fiscal year runs May to June. It's a bit of a different approach this year. We've always been heavily weighted in the past with an on-air pledge drive. The pledge drive success is driven almost purely by our multicultural community hosts. Okay, so that's one day a week on Sundays where we have multicultural hosts representing cultures all across the world just on one day. So that's where a lot of the fundraising revenue came from us. So by taking a bit of a different approach, we're actually getting out into the community, doing pop-up broadcasts, and that's brought us some success so far this year. We feel as though event-based fundraising is going to help us to be able to generate funds more efficiently, especially as we've undergone so many programming changes. The On-Air Pledge Drive is going to be a work in progress still, but as we're bringing in more student hosts, we now recognize we need to retool the on-air process for fundraising to accommodate that. Really, we'd love help from students with fundraising, sure, but when they're already making a commitment through their student fees and their time with learning how to broadcast at Radio Western, we really do need to push the burden on fundraising to our community hosts and partners. So now, because our multicultural programming is still the leading driver for fundraising, we need that equity between our multicultural hosts who do such a great job and getting more buy-in from our other community volunteers. So some upcoming events include trivia nights, a spring concert series with higher profile artists that draw community members that hopefully have a couple of dollars in their pocket, and a few multicultural events specific to sections of the community that are represented on air, and more solicitation of our alumni to help move the station forward. Retooling staffing for the upcoming budget, and we're going to attempt to fill a large gap in there that we have in a volunteer coordinator, which is something we desperately need. Those duties right now are spread across program director, station manager, but mostly the marketing position. So we'd like to have our staff move away from that coordination part so that they can focus on their jobs rather than having to coordinate volunteers. If we had one volunteer coordinator that can be a liaison between all of the different departments, it'll alleviate them and enable them to focus on what's in front of them rather than having to deal with, you know, tech issues and all that kind of thing. So that is something that we are looking for. It's just the sustainability portion of that we need to make sure we have before we put it on. So the next slide is going to be advertising. So our goal for advertising and revenue this year is $10,000. So major renewed interest in advertising this year as the profile of the station gets raised in the community. We're even going to open up the website a bit for advertising for the first time with some sidebar. In November through until June, we're going to hit the pavement and continue to look for more sponsorship. In the past, really, we've done a good job with soliciting small local business, right? But we also want to try and reach out to larger corporations that typically have deeper pockets that do align with our core values. It's not like something where we want to solicit McDonald's to come and advertise with us, right? But looking at companies and corporations that have things that they want to be able to advertise, but actually align a little bit more with our core values and values of students as a whole too. So with that, we also open up opportunities for students and community members to earn commission there too, which is a pretty interesting way to be involved with Radio Western. You know, don't necessarily have to have a whole lot of buy-in from the volunteer side. We can come in and support some sales positions and hopefully earn some revenue for students there too. So we'll move to the last slide. I like this slide, very much so. From 31% of our total volunteer base as undergraduate students in 2015 to this year, where not only do we have more volunteers involved than ever before, 61% of them are undergraduate students. So not only are we focused on a whole lot of other stuff, revenue generation, sustainability, retooling our equipment, and redeveloping the way we do a lot of things from the ground up, we've also put a major focus on student participation and the numbers reflect that. So we had a really successful September this year in bringing in new students. We're now focused on a larger recruitment drive in January, and then really putting the focus on even more success for us in September 2019. A lot more first-year students involved too. And what's the really good thing about first-year students is they tend to stick around and remember Radio Western. So I do recall a time not that long ago where I could be out in the UCC talking to students and say, "Hey, do you know what CHRW is?" And the answer was always no. Now I can go down in the UCC and, "Hey, have you heard of Radio Western?" Yeah, I think I've heard of that. That's cool. We'll come on up and volunteer with us. So rebranding and making sure that we're pushing Radio Western out there has helped our profile immensely. And I asked for 20 minutes and kept it fairly brief for you two today. So if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, please let me know.
We do have 5 minutes for questions, so if anyone has any. Yes, Vice President Chang.
Hello. Danny Chang, USC Vice President. So this is now going to be my third year being involved directly on the council. And I just wanted to really just iterate just how impressed I am, and I think many of us in this room are, how student-centric a lot of these changes are, and how really innovative and efficient and very, very much valuing sort of students, their volunteer capabilities, student dollars, and I just really wanted to stress how awesome a lot of that presentation was. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Danny. And just to quickly say something there, it's a lot of work that goes into that. I work 37 and I get paid for 37 and a half. I've been doing 60 for 3 years. So it's been a lot of work and a lot of effort in doing this kind of thing. So to have that kind of recognition is a big deal, because these walls have bled in here for me a couple of times, right? So it's nice to come in here with some smiling faces for once.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we will have Teaching Quality at Western paper presentation from our Vice President Chang.
So up with me will be Jacob Ferguson, Associate Research, working directly in my portfolio. Cool. Do you want me to just kind of practice? Sure. Great. So while they kind of get that up, so this policy paper is within the USC library related to teaching quality at Western. It's something that the Advocacy Standing Committee has kind of been going back and forth on for about, I want to say about a month and a half, 2 months now. And so a lot of this work is done with lots of research, lots of precedent, and taking a look at also our policies and making it more efficient so that we don't have to be renewing sort of overlapping policies every year on the USC. And this is largely in part due to the work of Jacob right behind me. So he will kind of take it away with a bit of context and a bit of the review going into the details of the paper.
Great, thank you very much, Danny. Okay, so this paper is divided into a few different sections, and I'll just be doing a very brief overview of each section. And if anyone has more specific questions, I'm happy to do a bit of a deeper dive in response to those questions later on. And awesome, so you can see our paper displayed here. If we just scroll down a little bit to the first section, yep, perfect, on the second page. So the first section that we talked about is increasing the availability of student feedback. So perhaps a common theme through this paper is Western already has a lot of excellent resources, but students sometimes just aren't aware of them. And this is one example of that. So currently, Western has the SQCT website, which students are given protected class time to fill out their reviews of their course experience. What we want is just to ensure that future students and prospective students are better aware of this resource, perhaps by implementing a link to this resource in the Student Center website or through some other similar mechanism so that future students can benefit from current students' experiences. Great, so I think that's a sort of the nutshell summary of idea number one. So then scrolling down to the next page on Western degree outcomes, perfect. So this is a sort of a bit of a separate subtopic within this paper. In addition to the course-specific competencies that students take away from their classes, there are also some broader transferable skills that classes might highlight and develop. For instance, you could imagine that a course with an emphasis on group presentations gives students transferable learning skills about working with others, being a member of a team, and so on. Recognizing that courses often sort of subtly develop professional competencies, the Western Senate has actually already passed an excellent framework of degree outcomes that every student in Western sort of cultivates over the course of their career here. So all that we're recommending in this section of the paper is incorporating these degree outcomes into course syllabi and having professors sort of highlight when certain assignments help students develop certain degree outcomes so students can better articulate what they've learned at job interviews and when they move into the workforce. Great, so I think, yeah, that's again a good summary there. So scrolling down to section 3 on increasing the use of open educational resources. Perfect. So this is something Danny's a bit of an expert in. I might give it a quick overview, or do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just, so basically it's just one of the policies that the USC already has. We're just amalgamating it into here. We've kind of gotten 2 out of 3 of our recommendations from the policy that was written 2 years ago already completed and advocated on. So this is just to make less overlap, less coming through council and reviewing, that sort of thing. And then this is just more about talking about incentivizing faculty more to be adopting these resources that are more accessible to students, free, that are easier to use. So, yeah.
Perfect. All right, and so then moving on to the next section of the paper, eliminating unnecessary textbook, perfect, and course expenses. So this is sort of, this section stems from a concern that students often pay for resources as part of their courses, whether it's textbooks or sort of like online learning modules. And it may be the case that access to these resources or very similar resources is already freely available through the Western Libraries database. This concern is substantiated by the fact that at U of T, a sort of research project was undertaken to see if this was occurring. And this preliminary project found almost $500,000 worth of unnecessary student expenses due to this unneeded double payment. So what we're proposing is sort of implementing a similar initiative, basing it off of what U of T has already done, to parse through the Western Libraries database and see if current curricular expenses are already available for free. And once those are identified, just changing to those free alternatives to avoid unnecessary student costs. All right, and then moving on to the second last section on peer tutoring services. So again, this fits into the sort of general theme of learning at Western occurring in a broader context than just within the classroom. Western already has a lot of excellent peer mentorship programs, whether that's sort of some of the general centralized services that are offered here at the UCC, or more sort of faculty-specific resources. I think in this paper we mentioned the Biochemistry Club as an example, but in all your own faculties, I'm sure you can think of many examples of these kinds of peer learning groups. What we're recommending is fostering better sort of cooperation and collaboration between these peer learning groups and the professors of the courses that they tutor. This is beneficial because it would allow professors to sort of guide the peer tutors in emphasizing the most important parts of the course, and it would also facilitate the development of better peer tutoring programs over the years. Okay, great. And then moving on to the last section of the paper here. So this section of the paper talks about ensuring that student feedback is considered during the faculty hiring process. So currently, Western does already stipulate that teaching performance should be assessed when considering promoting faculty members. But what we're hoping for is making this a bit of a better defined process, because currently it's a little bit vague. Western guidelines basically just say consider it, but they don't exactly say to what extent or what resources you should look at. So we haven't proposed a specific percentage that it should count for or anything, but just sort of putting this as an action item that like administration can look at. And then an additional part of our recommendations here is ensuring that feedback on faculty performance that comes from students is properly reflective of the faculty's teaching abilities rather than other factors that might bias the feedback. So for example, like some research has found that factors beyond a professor's control, like the lecture start times or something like that, can correlate with professor feedback. And so we're recommending that Western look into this to see if, for instance, like there's a systematic bias of lower feedback for early morning classes, and adjust for this or account for this in some way so that professors are being evaluated fairly and equitably. Okay, awesome. So that's the sort of like whirlwind summary. I'll open it up to questions in a moment, but first, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Nope. Sweet, awesome. So any questions on this or comments?
Cool. So we'll just be voting to ratify this, I guess, in the voting period.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes our presentations for this evening. We will now move to our 4 action items, starting with motion 1, ratification of the 2018-2019 USC Deputy Speaker of Council. So that's Daniel over here. So President Pratt has moved this motion. I will look for a seconder. Councillor Tasia? Any questions regarding this motion? Okay, I will now open up the floor for debate. Okay, seeing none. Councillor Lawler?
Karen Lawler, Social Science Counselor. Would Daniel be able to introduce himself before we vote?
Yes, absolutely. Do you mind just going up there?
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Petrov. I am a first-year student in BMOS. It's really an honor to be your deputy speaker for this year. I'm really looking forward to working with Madison and working with everyone to kind of improve the student experience at Western, and also great costumes, everyone. Looking forward to this year. Thank you.
Also, just to add on to that, Daniel was hired by myself and Nick Sauvé, and there were a total of 5 candidates, so it was a competitive hiring process, and we both felt that he was the best fit for the position. Any other debate regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, we will... Okay, polls are now open for this motion. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closed and the motion passes. Congratulations, Daniel. Welcome to the USC. Okay, next. Great. Our next motion for this evening is motion to approve the Teaching Quality at Western policy paper. So that is the paper that was just presented by Vice President Chang. And we have a mover, which is Vice President Chang, and I will look for a seconder for this motion. Councillor Fernandez. Okay, Vice President Chang, would you like to add anything else?
No, just that we've been working on it for a couple months. We've gotten feedback, really good feedback from the Advocacy Standing Committee, a good back and forth, and we've had some good iterations. So there's been a lot of adjustments there. So we'd really appreciate if you pass this policy.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez, would you like to speak to this motion? Okay, great, thank you. Any questions regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up to debate. And yes, Councillor Lawler.
Kieran Lawler, Social Science Counselor. Just want to say we passed this through Advocacy Standing Committee unanimously. So yeah, I hope everyone votes in favor of it.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other debate? Okay, seeing none, we will move to call to question. And polls are now open. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closed, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to our third motion of this evening. Motion for the creation of an ad hoc committee to address mature and transfer student issue. Councillor Foreman moved this motion. I will look for a seconder. Councillor Teja, thank you. Councillor Foreman, would you like to speak to this motion?
Jared Foreman, Social Science President. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time to talk about the absolute importance of this motion and some of the issues that have been brought up in our Advocacy Standing Committee and in informal consultations with some of the mature students. Mature students and transfer students have distinct issues that many traditionally aged students simply do not experience, and it's just hard to empathize with. And these distinct needs are things that absolutely need to be addressed through an ad hoc committee. In particular, I'll mention some of the barriers that have been mentioned, one of which is often mature and transfer students are denied work-study programs. They don't have access to bursaries. Some social barriers. Mature students are often don't feel at home within lectures, feel ostracized and have difficulty connecting with their peers. And there's even a concern in which many of them simply cannot even be considered mature students by the university, considering the very strict definition of what constitutes a mature student, and consequently don't have access to the variety of resources that are available to them. So for those variety of reasons and the fact that it has been passed through the Advocacy Standing Committee prior, I strongly recommend that Council approve this motion.
Councillor Teja, would you like to speak to this motion?
Inam Teja, Huron President. Just wanted to also speak in favor of this motion. This is something that we discussed at length and made a few changes to in our Advocacy Standing Committee meeting with regards to the language around the composition as well as mature and transfer students. So this has been extensively debated. We've also held an informal sort of meeting just to see what kinds of issues would come up with some sort of preliminary members of what could be this sort of ad hoc committee, and it really highlighted to me a lot of the unique issues that were brought forward. So I think that this is a really great way to address these problems, is by having this subcommittee act as a sort of funnel for these issues towards the Advocacy Standing Committee in order to make sure that these issues do get addressed appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions regarding this motion? Councillor Sawyer?
Yeah, so I mean, it seems well researched, and I think it's definitely a useful committee to have. I'm just wondering if you could speak to why it's set up to report to our council and not towards either advocacy or student experience.
Councillor Foreman?
I believe that perhaps would be a typo. It is meant to be reported directly to the Advocacy Standing Committee.
Okay, that's something that we should bring up in the debate then. Councillor Lawler? Did you have a question? Okay, thank you. Councillor Anthony?
Councillor Anthony Kings. Councillor, I just had a question about the formation of this committee. I know that on the USC website it says that there's a caucus for mature and transfer students, so I was just wondering, with the creation of this committee, what does that do to the caucus? Does the caucus still exist? And then if so, with that, what does this committee do in place of that? Thank you.
Councillor Yee?
So that caucus is defunct. It was alive 4 years ago, and it wasn't really the best model. Nothing really got done from that, so which is why we decided to move forward with this subcommittee instead.
Okay. Councillor Hollenberg?
Councillor Hollenberg, Law Councillor. So my question is this looking at mature students strictly in the undergraduate program, Or is this looking at both undergraduate and professional, given, for example, that as a mature student in a professional program, it's not as unusual or not as rare. I think it might be a bit more accommodating. So just curious as to where the focus is for these mature students.
Councillor Yee?
Yeah, so this motion and subcommittee was drafted in collaboration with the Society of Mature Students, which represents only mature students in the undergraduate stream. So for graduate students, their issues would more so fall in their SOGs.
Okay.
Sorry, point of information. I wasn't referring to graduate students, but professional students, which are not part of SOGs. As the professional programs such as nursing and law are represented here. So just to clarify, if professional is grouped in for these purposes with graduate or with undergraduate, or if they're distinct?
Yeah, the professional programs are accounted for within this.
Okay, any other questions regarding this motion? Councillor Foreman?
Jared Foreman, Social Science President. I believe the version of the motion that's presented on the agenda and on the screen there is an older version. It has been amended to reflect its composition, changes in composition, and it's reporting directly to the Advocacy Standing Committee.
Okay, would you mind sending that copy, please? Potentially posting it actually in the Facebook group would be great. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we will then enter debate. Councillor Yee?
So Brianne Dura, the coordinator for Society of Mature Students, was really supposed to come to the meeting to speak to the perspective of mature students, but unfortunately she couldn't make it today. So she's asked me just to read off some of the reasons why this subcommittee is extremely necessary, and to put it on the record for the USC as to why mature students are a group that we as student leaders should be addressing. So for example, this year they've already had 4 mature students have to drop out of 5 actually, mature students, one that were having to drop out. To put that into perspective, when Jared and I were writing this motion with her, the number was at 3. So in the past 2 months, that has gone up by 2 more students. Additionally, many times when they go to try to get academic accommodation, for example, many mature students who have children, when their children are sick, they have to go and pick them up for school. So it's really an option between school and their children obviously have to come first. However, the school currently does not recognize having to take care of your child as a valid excuse to get academic accommodation. So many mature students have no choice but to not write their midterm, receive a 0 to go take care of their child, which is an extremely unfair decision for them to have to make. Furthermore, just the culture that they experience, always feeling like outsiders, always feeling like their voice is not being heard, is something that they face on a day-to-day basis. One mature student was publicly challenged by a professor while being in a class that he was enrolled in. The professor challenged him as someone who didn't belong there, someone who was just there observing and not an actual student, and wouldn't listen to him when he clarified that he actually was a mature student. So these are issues that are very widespread and very common and very often faced by mature students. And without this committee, students like ourselves who are lucky enough to come to university right after high school won't necessarily have these perspectives and won't be able to bring them to the table. And what other thing I was going to say is that Brianne actually brought up an interesting point when we first met and about the importance of this committee was the fact that a lot of mature students are mature students because of trauma that they face. Because out of high school, they may have suffered from issues or mental illness that prevented them from going to school right after high school. And that's why they had to take that break. And oftentimes that lingers and that persists and that can manifest itself again once they do come to university. And that's an additional support system that they do need. And so, like the LGBTQ committee last year, we want to use this as an opportunity to bring that voice to the table and make changes on their behalf that they see fit and that they believe are necessary.
Okay. Councillor Foreman, thank you for posting the new version. Would you mind, again, just reminding Council of the updates in this version?
Yeah, sure. So Jared Foreman, Social Science President. The updates just reflect the changes in composition that we agreed upon in committee. So what's new is that the ad hoc committee will be directly reporting to the Advocacy Standing Committee, and the composition will only include members from the Advocacy Standing Committee, which were selected at its last meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Any other debate regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, we will call to question and vote. Polls are now open.
Sorry, point of information, it still says council. In the terms of reference, it's 2.3.
Councillor Teja?
Inam Teja, Huron President. I wanted to, so I think we actually discussed this in committee where we agreed that the report to council would just come through the Advocacy Standing Committee Chair report. And so I would just deliver a report as I also sit on the subcommittee. And so it would just be a part of my Advocacy Standing Committee report. So that's how the feedback mechanism would get to council.
Councillor Sawyer, is that,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
fine? Okay.
Sorry,
Councillor
I know I'm
McCauley.
late too, but just a point of information, is the CRO here to conduct the election that is noted in this?
We do have the DRO here, however, apparently it's already happened within the standing committee, so we don't have to do an election this evening.
Oh, so then why does it say in the motion that it will occur following the voting of this at council?
You're correct, it still does say that in the revised motion. Councillor Foreman?
Jared Foreman, Social Science President. So originally, when the motion was passed in committee, we were under the impression that it would not have to come to the council floor because it would simply be a committee which would serve under the Advocacy Standing Committee, so we can revise it to reflect that change, the fact that it had to come to council floor.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can restart this vote given kind of all these last minute things that are coming out?
Well, yes, but technically all the things that have been brought up were things that Councillor Foreman brought up before we commenced the vote.
Okay. I'm just concerned about the following the election versus or passing of the motion.
But he, during his updates, he said that we had already had the elections. Okay. Okay. Does anyone object to continuing with the vote that already happened? Well, hasn't closed yet, but no, we're good. Okay. Polls are now closed, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, next motion. Motion 4, standing resolutions of council, executive in-camera privileges. I will look for a mover and a seconder for this motion. Councillor Baldwin and Councillor Kamenetsky. Councillor Baldwin, would you like to speak to this motion?
All right, so this was a pretty standard motion that was passed through Governance and Finance. Basically, every time there's an in-camera session, we have to vote to allow the executives that aren't the president and the vice president, the secretary treasurer, the SPO, and the communications officer. We have to vote to keep them in the in-camera session, or else if we don't vote, then they have to leave. So basically, all this does is updates the standing resolutions of council so that they automatically remain during an in-camera session, and you'd have to vote to remove them. You'd have to submit a motion to remove them during an in-camera session.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kamenetsky, would you like to speak to this motion? Okay. Are there any questions regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, we will enter debate. I do have one, Councillor Baldwin. Thank you, though. Councillor Sawyer. Yes, we will call to question. Polls are now open. Three, two, one. Polls are closed, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to motion 5, motion to restructure the appeals board as outlined in bylaw 6. This motion was moved by President Pratt. I will look for a seconder. Councillor Sawyer. President Pratt, would you like to speak to this motion?
I'd like to defer my speaking rights to Secretary Treasurer Bouchon.
I'd like to note that I already have speaking rights for this meeting, so anyway, that being said, so basically this conversation started a little bit earlier in the summer when we realized that there was only one member left on the appeals board because there was a bit of miscommunication in terms of who was supposed to elect the appeals board. So that being said, we kind of got together and started thinking about what the appeals board needed in order to function better, and what we decided is that they need more support and more oversight from the USC in terms of being able to have someone from Human Resources sit on the hiring and ensuring that they have all the support needed to them that is given to them. So we spoke to the one member that currently remains on the appeals board, and in our conversations with them and with Nick Sauvé, the Government Services Senior Manager, we discussed a model that would allow the appeals board to be restructured. It's still relatively similar to the way that it functioned before. The major changes to this would be how we hire the appeals board. So instead of the complicated the complicated process that it was before, it's now going to be the appeals board chair will be hired by the senior manager of government services and the senior manager or someone from the Human Resources Department who is appointed to that. And those two will hire the appeals board chair. Then the appeals board chair will work with the Human Resources Department to hire the rest of the committee. This functions very similar to the Elections Governance Committee. It would just be a second committee, and it would sit under board. So that's one of the major changes. I'll also allow my associate governance, Keaton, to speak a little bit more to the specific policies of it.
Yeah, so the way this is going to work, or the way it was envisioned, is that bylaw 6 would be repealed by council, and it would get picked up by the board in a new iteration, which would be hired instead of having the board members be nominated by councillors and the board. At the same time, this updates the nominating committee terms of reference to reflect to reflect the changing of bylaw 6. So that's why that's also there.
Councillor Sawyer, would you like to speak to this motion? Okay. All right. Are there any questions regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, we will enter debate. And seeing no debate, we will call to question. Polls are now open. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Polls are closed, and the motion passes. Technically, as there was an abstention, it wasn't unanimous. That's okay. Okay, motion 6. Endorse and distribute an inclusivity and accessibility checklist to event programmers on campus. This motion was moved by Councillor Barroso and seconded by Councillor Danesi. Councillor Barroso, would you like to speak to this motion?
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Victoria Barroso, Science Counselor. So hopefully you've had a chance to look over the motion and the accessibility checklist that's attached with it. So the peer peer programs coordinators last year created this checklist, and we kind of discussed it in standing committee and agreed that this was something that should be distributed to event planners on campus. It's a really comprehensive checklist, and it's a really good checklist for event planners on campus to have, just to keep in mind some things that maybe they haven't considered prior, in event planning prior, while they're planning events for future events. Wow, I can't speak today. Yeah, so this is not a hard checklist where we're saying that every event is mandated to have these things, but it's just something that will bring these considerations to light when event planners are doing things on campus in the future, so that hopefully they can consider some things and make the events more accessible than they have been in the past for people in the future.
Okay.
If you want to add to that.
Councillor Danesi, would you like to speak to this motion?
Yeah, Councillor Danesi, Science Councillor. I just want to emphasize the points that this checklist is neither exhaustive nor is it a strict set of guidelines, but rather it exists so that event programmers can have sort of an ideal set of things they should follow to make their events as inclusive and accessible as possible. The reason we're bringing it to council is to sort of give it democratic legitimacy from elected representatives saying that we support this initiative. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions regarding this motion? Councillor Anthony?
Chris Anthony, King's Councillor. I was just having questions about some of the content of the checklist. Under the inclusivity section, it says if your event covers heavy content, are you providing them with resources they can access afterwards? I was just wondering from the student experience subcommittee or from the people who helped make this checklist if there was consideration about offering your resources to people during the event, and then if there was questions or considerations about distributing content warnings prior to the beginning of the event, should they be necessary. Thank you.
Councillor Barroso?
I was going to direct this maybe at Karina, since she's one of the peer coordinators last year.
Yeah, good question, Councillor Anthony. So yeah, in the process of making this last year, as was mentioned by Councillor Barroso, that this was compiled through the peer programs coordinators. So last year that was myself, I was a Women's Issues Network coordinator, ethnocultural, accessibility, we had Pride, Ally, and Health Promotions that all put this together. And in creating this document, from what I can remember, what we were called was that this checklist is supposed to be applicable to a variety of events, whether that is a small focused event or a huge one. The point being that sometimes the resources were not available to be had at the event, but in the case that they were, that is something that they would offer. But no matter whatever your event may be, whether it's large, whether it's small, whether you have a budget for it or not, to provide even support resources, that after the fact, you will be providing that. In regards to your second part about the caution, or providing warnings, or whether that be necessary for a trigger warning, whatever that may look like, I think that's something that we can explore and adding. I don't see why not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Yee?
Frankie, Science President. Just a question. You said that the consultation process involved the USC coordinators. I'm just wondering what their process looked like in terms of building this. Was there further consultations done by them with members of the various communities that this successfully list addresses?
So this was an initiative that, in starting it last year, what came out of the frustration that a lot of our events, it came around a time where there were a particular amount of news stories that were coming out about how events were not deemed accessible or inclusive to large portions of the community. So it started off as something that our coordinators created, and then was going to be disseminated through the student programs officer portfolio to our coordinators, and then potentially extend that to clubs. So throughout the student programs officer portfolio. So when it kind of advanced, and Councillor Danesi kind of brought this up to me a few months ago, and then we brought it to the Student Experience Committee. At that time, it just existed in the way that it had been created last year. So short answer to that is that our coordinators are considered the experts on campus in their particular field. So when they were creating this, it was over about 6 months that it was produced. Personally, I can speak for myself. When I was a coordinator, I did consult my committee. I can't say that I know that for every other one, and I don't have the ability to go back to ask them about that. But if you've read it, I passed it actually through a variety of other. So all of the coordinators this year have seen it as well. So we've now had two different sets of peer programs coordinators view it, and a couple members in the community as well. I've shared this with them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the consultation process.
Councillor Lawler.
Kieran Lawler, Social Science Counselor. I just wanted to clarify. So if for some possible legitimate reason that like a club is holding an event and they might not be able to satisfy certain requirements of the checklist, there won't be any negative kind of repercussions or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's kind of why we specifically said that's not a strict set of guidelines. You know, obviously if a club's hosting an event at a member's house, we don't expect them to sort of get a ramp for their front stairs, right? Because that's sort of unrealistic, but it's sort of a set of ideal guidelines that if you can meet them, you should.
Okay, any other questions regarding this motion? Okay, seeing none, we will now enter debate. And seeing no debate, we will call to question. Polls are now open. Three, two, one. Polls are now closed. And the motion passes unanimously. Okay, that is the end of our for action section of the agenda. We will now move on to our for information, starting off with our executive reports.
All right, greetings, Muggles. So, spookiest part of my morning was I woke up with strep throat, so bear with me up here. So basically, I'll just keep this very brief tonight. So completed, freedom of expression draft policy. So as I said in the last council meeting, I was the sole undergraduate representative on the Freedom of Expression Ad Hoc Policy Creation Committee. So the draft policy, and I stress draft, has been completed for approval by Senate and for approval at the board level. So written submissions are still open, I do believe. So if you have a written submission that you would like to submit to President at Western USC or the committee itself, I encourage you to do so. And I have included the policy in the for discussion section of our council meeting tonight, and I will preface that discussion, I think, when we get there as well. So the USC Foundation launch. So I believe 2 weeks ago, we had an event in downtown Toronto where it was attended by over 100 alumni of the USC to celebrate the launch of the USC Foundation. So if you're unclear about what the USC Foundation is, it is a arm's length charity aimed at directly funding student initiatives and student leaders initiatives on this campus as well. So it is a way for USC alumni who are very passionate about this organization to directly give back to, I think, student initiatives on this campus, which I think is a very inherently powerful and very, very exciting thing for us as a council. And I think there was over $1 million of pledges from alumni in that night, and we're very, very excited to keep building out the governance, attain charitable status, and then start looking at the structures for how we directly fund student initiatives on campus. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to let me know. USC Resource Fair. So we held the first USC Resource Fair and had very good attendance from our associates coordinators board, and there were several counselors there as well. And it was a good thing to see all different sides of student leadership within the organization interacting with one another and better understanding what our respective roles are in the organization. We are going to be looking into the feasibility of hosting another one of these throughout the year, as I think it's inherently important we have a better understanding of how we can work together as an organization and collaborate with one another. The AVP housing hiring. So Karina and I actually sat on the hiring panel over Reading Week for the new AVP housing, and so housing and ancillary services. So this is a very important position for students. The former director of residence, Chris Lane, has been hired for this position. So congratulations, Chris. We look forward to working with him in the future. And airport shuttle services. So if you saw the recent graphic that went out, our airport shuttle is going to be available for final exam season. Pre-registration is actually starting tomorrow, so I encourage you to check that out. Okay, and current, so faculty council presentation. So half of you, I think, so far, engineering, Huron, FIMS, have all, and arts, have had the executive come and give you a presentation. So this kind of stemmed from a promise we made during campaign season that we really wanted to bring the USC to students. We didn't want to have students have to come to the USC. So we basically based these presentations on the 3 core pillars of who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And we look forward to hearing from even more councils moving forward. And we're looking into doing the same format for next semester. So if you have any questions or suggestions for improvement around this, I would love to hear your thoughts. So cannabis policy consultations. So this is should be a spicy one, but we are looking forward to looking into the permanent cannabis policy policy on campus. So it's still in the formulation stage, as the provincial government had some very last minute changes when the Western had a very more permanent policy in place. So now the ad hoc policy has been released, and what is most likely going to happen is going to be added in a stipulation under the existing Substances Act, so the alcohol and other things on this campus, the policy for that. So external Purple Fest consultations. So I've been having a lot of meetings with external stakeholders, including the London Police, London City Council, and many other external stakeholders around the success and the feedback for improvement on alternative programming on the date of September 29th to ensure that student safety is our utmost priority on this date. So moving forward, this is still an ongoing process throughout the year. So UCRU Lobby Week booking. So if you guys, I remember I sought approval from council to run for the UCRU chair. So the Undergraduates of Research Intensive Universities is our federal advocacy coalition, much similar to USA, but more grassroots. And so we represent over 9 schools in the U15. And from December 2nd to 6th, we are going to be going to Parliament Hill to take meetings with many MPs, staffers, and ministers to try and get our messages across for how we can better the student undergraduate experience across Canada, not just on Western Campus itself. So we're very excited about this and excited to get underway with that. And so executive campus office hours. So if you haven't checked us out at any campus office hours recently, I encourage you to. We have been moving around different buildings. Danny and Michaela were in Talbot College today, I believe, and we've been going to Taylor Library, we've done the UCC, of course, and we've done just many different locations. So stay tuned for our next location near you, and encourage your students to come out if you have any questions about what we do and why we do it. Okay, to come, so the USC Sustainability Plan Working Group is going to be struck at the student experience level. So this is going to be a collaborative effort between board, coordinator, and counselors to try and ensure that we move towards more sustainable metrics as an organization and how we can further optimize our operations to meet more sustainable metrics. So if you saw, we've actually made many improvements as of late. So Wave does not distribute straws as well, unless you would ask for one. The Spoke has moved to more biodegradable travel cups, and Andrea and myself are working on producing travel mugs for sale at the Spoke as well. So stay tuned for some nice Spoke travel mugs to come. You actually get a discount on your coffee if you have a travel mug, fun fact. So London Bar Manager Sexual Violence Education Roundtable. So we are looking to do in the second semester, after the results from the Safe Cities London initiative come back, a roundtable among all the bar managers in London, noting that sexual violence is of a higher frequency at many of our London bars. And if you look at the Safe Cities map, there are significant points on some of the more popular Richmond Row locations. So I will have more updates for you to come. This can be a collaborative effort between Karina and myself, and how we work proactively with many of the managers downtown to kind of ensure a safer space for our students. And State of the USC. So Wednesday, November 6th, come out and listen to me speak for half an hour. All right, no takers? Okay, no. So Danny and I will be speaking upon the state of the USC, giving a kind of a mid-year update on what we have achieved so far, what we are looking to achieve, and kind of, so this will be in the UCC, and I encourage you all to come out, ask questions, encourage your friends to come out and to kind of get a better idea of what we do as a council and as an executive. And late night breakfast, of course, everyone's favorite, will be on during final season this year. It's currently underway in the organizational phase, and I'll make sure that everyone gets sufficient tater tots. Cool. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barroso, did you have a question?
Wednesday, November 6th doesn't exist. Is it the 7th?
I'm so sorry. Yeah, it's
It's the 7th?
Was it no
Okay,
7th?
okay.
It's been a long week and it's only Wednesday. Apologies. Yeah.
Councillor Hollenberg?
My apologies, President.
No
I
worries.
do have a question. So I noticed that our current cannabis policy would be the most restrictive of the different sort of categories of drugs on campus. There's places where you like to drink, there's places where you like to smoke, tobacco, but currently there's a complete prohibition on the smoking of cannabis. Is there? I don't know if you know this, but is that common among Canadian universities? And whether or not it is, are there any plans on revisiting this and potentially changing it?
So if I can just jump in. So Mitch and I actually are in the midst of sitting down with Matthew Mills, who is the health and safety consultant at the university who's kind of leading this. And likely what will happen is we'll probably reach out to one of the committees, likely Student Experience or Advocacy Standing Committee, about further consultation to bring up points kind of like the one that you just brought up. So
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it's still in the consultative phase. So we moving forward. I'm happy you brought this up, and I'm looking forward to having conversations about this moving forward.
Councillor
Okay.
Macaulay?
I was wondering how many days you're doing late night breakfast for, and if you were able to receive funding from alumni, because I know that's something that they cut last year, and I was wondering if you're able to expand the program back to what it was before, or if you have to cut it again.
I'm still in consultations with Alumni Western, and so I don't have an answer for you right now, but I will look forward to having an answer at the next council meeting, I think, before late night breakfast happens as well.
And
Thank you for that.
Councillor Yee?
So just a question about, you mentioned the straws in the smoke are now biodegradable. They are by the coffee area, but by the kitchen, it's labeled biodegradable, but the straws are very clearly still plastic.
I didn't say the straws were, but sorry.
Point of information, Kieran Lawler, Social Science Counselor. I work at the Spoke, so I can confirm the ones by the pop machine are still biodegradable, even if they don't look like it.
Thank you, Kieran.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, I just have to zoom in here. Okay, as always, I just have a lot. Okay, great. So with the new AVP Student Experience, there's a lot of director level positions that are open. And so within Student Experience, there's going to be a lot of hirings moving forward. So the executive will be engaging to kind of be discussing kind of the next steps for what Student Experience looks like, which is really great because Student Experience oversees things like athletics to health and wellness, all the way to kind of career learning, experiential learning, that sort of thing. Also, so I participated in kind of the hiring process for the Vice Provost Academic Programs. So that individual kind of oversees all of the associate deans, as well as the engineering dean with Allie, and then the chief librarian. So the new roles for those positions. Sorry, so just so you know, I'm going under university right now. The other thing is conversations around mental health. So one of the things that we've been kind of bringing up since the very beginning was the need for more proactive measures and better integration when it comes to mental health services, but also information. And so we are kind of discussing that currently, and there are kind of big discussions that I think will be bringing forward in the next couple of weeks, depending on kind of what we're presented on our end. One of the big initiatives that we're working on is medical note accommodations, and so this is something that's been going through the associate deans right now, and so we're taking a look at the medical note accommodations policy because we know it is really restrictive, and for students it can be a really big issue. You know, if you've been up really sick for 2 days in a row, but there's kind of these policies where you need to get a medical note, that sort of issue, and so we're in the midst of reviewing that with the faculty VP academics, as well as doing a consultation on experiential learning within the university. And again, that'll kind of be going through your VP academics as well as the Western Student Senators through what's called the Academic Priorities Committee. Municipally, participated in a Students in London panel with community members who actually thought students were great. So that was actually that was a change. That was really great. Municipal get out the vote. I'll speak to that on the next slide. After the municipal election, so we've reached out essentially to almost all the successful candidates, and we've actually joined with Fanshawe Student Union to write a letter, because collectively we represent over 50,000 students, talking about how important transit is in the city. We know that students at the USC said that was the number one service that we provided was the bus pass. One of the conversations we're having municipally too is lighting near University Drive. We know that it gets kind of dark and we want to make sure everyone's as safe as possible at night. We're also discussing with Enviro Western some advocacy within the city around a green bin program, as well as some things related to garbage pickup. Provincially, finishing off some campus visits at USA, so that's why you might have seen me all around different universities in Ontario. USA, you also might have heard my name a couple of times at Queen's Park, because we recently wrote a letter to the Minister of Training Colleges and Universities, and so we've kind of been going back and forth on that. And then for this weekend, we have the USA General Assembly, so you have some representatives around the room, and we'll be discussing tuition, teaching assessment, tech-enabled learning. Michaela will expand a bit later. Also, we have our Student Advocacy Week this month. So we've already booked over 55 meetings with various MPPs across the province. And so that will be the equivalent of myself and the equivalent of Mitch's role for 8 different student unions across Ontario at Queen's Park. And then another thing that will come up at GA is kind of discussions around free speech policies, as well as what that kind of looks like at a provincial level. Federally, we met with the Minister of Infrastructure discussing investments regarding how important buildings are to students, including the new engineering building, as well as WERB near University Hospital. Discussed, I don't know if any of you know who Mike Moffat is. He's a popular Canadian economist. So we were discussing kind of a UCRU priority federally related to tuition tax credits, fighting for all of you, making school more affordable. Then we have a roundtable with Peter Fragascatos coming up, and so that right now we've reached out to all of the students in our external advocacy portfolio, so Advocacy Standing Committee, Advocacy Task Force to get involved, and also then just kind of touching base with Karina about the Women in House initiatives, making sure that we're trying to get as many politicians on board as possible. Go to the next slide. This is just kind of a review of our Get Out the Vote success, I want to say. So thank you everyone who kind of got people involved in the municipal election. So we door knocked in all the residences. We hosted a Pints and Politics event. We were able to send out a survey and do profiles on candidates on our social media. We were able to get a Western proof of residency. We had approximately 280 people go to the advanced polls to vote in the municipal election on October 4th, which is like 2 weeks early, which is great. And we don't know about the results on the actual voting day, as there was like designated voting areas across the city. And then there was also KUCSC hosted the mayoral debate. Science Council and Social Science Council hosted the Ward 6 debate. I wrote a letter to the editor of the Gazette on the importance of voting, and we also did an interview on 106.9. So that was municipal Get Out the Vote. And this year, I have the lovely pleasure of having what some may refer to as the Big Three, where I am affected by all 3 elections at all 3 government levels. As the federal election, there'll be platforms starting to come out in the second semester. So exciting stuff, getting people involved in their duty to vote. Next, we recently talked with facilities management and have discussed an accommodation regarding smudging policies in the university, especially for things such as the powwow in Mustang Lounge. So really, really great partnership with the university, and that's thanks to the new Indigenous Relations Coordinator that Karina has hired, as well as discussing lighting on campus when people are walking late at night. And so one of the things that we're discussing is getting a new light bulb placed in the brand new sort of Talbot College pathway behind there, and facilities management is aware of kind of our concerns on that. We've done an accessibility policy review related to accommodations on the university, focused on universal design, making sure that no one has severe kind of barriers when it comes to participating within the classroom. Course wait lists, very complicated procedure. Registrar's office is very, very busy, but they hope to get a pilot project ready for the summer 2019 semester, which is really cool. Passed our teaching policy paper, and we've recently discussed with SOGS, as they kind of have a lot of the TAs kind of represented through SOGS, discussing How TAs are oftentimes the first people to see changing signs in mental health for students academically. So what resources do they have, and how can we kind of collaborate together on that? And then also within the university, we've done a review of the university's sexual violence policies and procedures, and we're talking about the AVP student experience around how we can make that more student-centric, more survivor-centric. And the last thing federally is just maintaining our good relations that we have with the MPs, and same with provincially. Cool. Any questions? Great. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. So, mine is long. But as a reminder, even though some people may not want to sit through it, it's really important because you elected me, and this is the group that will hold me accountable to the platform you elected me on. So that's why it's a little longer. Cool. So starting off with some completed items. So I'm going to go through the 5 different areas of the portfolio, and that's how I've organized them. So for clubs, the club governance committee is hired, plus the club support committee. We're really excited to get going. The first CGC meeting is going to be tomorrow night. And they've got quite a few clubs that they're ratifying and different policies that they're going through. Very excited about that. Additionally, we did a clubs town hall and a financial aid literacy session. So thank you to Calista for hosting that. Really appreciate that. The clubs town hall had a focus on food policy, and I'll get into that on my next slide. Programs. Enviro Week happened October 15th to 19th. You would have seen some of the programming happening in the UCC. The Haunted House. We had $950 raised. Plus, yeah, clapping. Plus 112 food items collected. 1,026 people went through the Haunted House. So that was over a course of 3 days. So really excited to have that. And of course, all the proceeds went to our on-campus food bank, the Food Support Services. So wonderful work to charity. Really great work also to FSS for getting the word out. Nuit Violet happened along with the headphone disco at the beginning of October. It was a really wonderful event. Moving on to peer programs, Outtober. So the entire month of October was Outtober programming. So we had quite a few different things happening. Thanks to our Pride and Ally coordinators for organizing that, as well as our Club Spectrum. Really great events. Something else that I ran was a comedy show. Deanne Smith was really wonderful. It was last week. Actually, really, really funny. Additional to that, Consent Sexual Violence Awareness Week happened just last week. I was on the planning committee for all of the programs, and we did quite a few different initiatives and really successfully implemented. So really happy about starting conversations and keeping them going on campus throughout the year. Orientation program, the associate orientation has been hired. Congrats to Connor as well. Additional to that, OSTAF has been hired. So they're just in the process, yay! They're just in the process right now of hiring all of the head softs. Peer Support Center, lots and lots of events that are happening in order to raise awareness about what the Peer Support Center is to all of our students. So they're engaging students just beyond the everyday business hours of the center. And then food collected for food support services in October. This is a cool number. 3,803 items were collected for food in October. So that's really, really wonderful. Great to the students on our campus. I wanted to give a shout out to the USC charity, the King's Soft Team, Meal Exchange, and IVHBA1 for collecting a huge portion of those 3,800 items. For myself, the sweater order. Please pay me tonight if you haven't already. If you have paid or if you still need to pay, come up here at the end of the meeting and we'll facilitate that. If you already have paid and you just need to collect your sweater, it's off to the side here. I think by the October meeting of council is the fastest that we've ever gotten USC sweaters going, so yay! So you can pick them up on the side. As Mitch mentioned, the AVP housing was hired just a couple weeks ago, so we sat through that interview process. Congrats to Chris. USC sexual violence education sessions. So we had all of you sit in through all of those sessions. All of you went, or we've made an accommodation for just a couple of you, so good for you. I hope that you really enjoyed them. If you have any feedback that you'd like to provide, please do so. The majority that we've gotten so far, or actually all of we've gotten so far, has been extremely positive, so that's good to hear that it made an impact. Wellness Week happened on the first week of October. Lots of great events happened there. Additional to that, the VPSE roundtables. So Vice President Student Events from all of your different councils attend this VPSE roundtable, and it's a really great space for fostering communications. That also happened a couple weeks ago. Next slide, please. Awesome. Give me 1 second. Awesome. My computer's so old.
Okay, clubs. To come, financial training. So Andrea, my clubs associate, Declan, are going to be getting together to offer clubs specific financial training in a couple of weeks, just to like train them to go through their ledgers if they have any questions. So just to follow up, we're really trying to create that communication and have these opportunities available for all of our students in the club system. Additional to that, dance space, still working on that. Our executives gotten together to talk about how we can really improve the experience for those clubs that do dance on campus. So the Campus Vibe pilot as well. People keep asking me questions about Western Link, what's happening with that. So we currently are piloting another platform called Campus Vibe. We're in the midst of gathering feedback from the clubs who are piloting it this semester. So once I have that feedback, I'll present it back to council. Food policy, Declan's been working really, really hard to create a consolidated document that is very intuitive and easy to understand for clubs to understand what the food policy is, as well as freshening up some areas that really need to be revisited so we can make this a far easier experience for our clubs who are having a hard time with food policy. Declan's also created an inventory policy. So which was also my platform, previous to this year, clubs could not technically hold inventory. So if you had a banner as a club, you had to get rid of it at the end of the year, which didn't really make much sense. So he's done a really great job of cleaning that up and creating this inventory process, policy, so clubs can now hold inventory, and we're able to hold them accountable to their membership about having that policy or about having that inventory and what that looks like. Additional to that, we're going to be posting some graphics about club ratification education. So students are always having questions about how do they get ratified? What do I do to get a club ratified? So we're going to be creating some graphics around that and really pushing that out to the Western community so that they're aware of how to do so. Makes it easier in terms of education-wise. Programs that are coming up, Remembrance Day ceremony is going to be November 12th. I'm working with the communications officer, Michaela, in order to push that out. So you will all be getting an invitation quite soon to that. I think it's actually tomorrow that we're putting that out there. So you'll be getting emailed, and it's going to be in the Mustang Lounge from 10:30 to 11:30. Additional to that, Theatre Western is going to be having their play Posh November 12th to 17th. Please come out. It's going to be in the Mustang Lounge as well in just a couple weeks. Peer programs, Trans Day of Resistance and Remembrance is going to be happening on November 20th. Accessibility Inclusivity Checklist, as was proposed at this meeting. So we're going to now, as it's been passed, we're going to be disseminating that to all of our campus stakeholders, whether those be clubs, faculty councils, affiliate councils, professional schools, etc. Whomever does programming on campus is essentially going to have access to that. Indigenous Awareness Week is happening, considering bringing in a speaker. That's going to be the last week of November. My accessibility and ethnocultural coordinator are putting on an accessibility and diversity conference. In the coming months, I'll provide more feedback and information about that in the following month. Health promotions. So my health promotions coordinator is looking to do some cannabis education just to ensure students are aware of healthy habits around cannabis use. What does campus policy look like? So they're going to try and answer a lot of questions around that. The Women in House. We just had our first meeting with all of the individuals who will be participating in Women in House last night, and I have never been in a room with more energy and excitement. It was so inspiring to see all of the women there in that meeting. So it's been an absolutely phenomenal journey. We're getting prepared for that. It's going to be on November 22nd. Danny had referenced it, so working with Danny and Michaela and ensuring that's being pushed out to the community. And we'll be having a post coming out very soon about who those women are and why they apply, just to ensure that we're really getting ready and the community excited for this initiative. Orientation, currently working with Director of Residences to do more in regards to behavior sanctions for SOFs. We want to create an actual framework with which to apply sanctions when it comes to behavior, and currently there isn't one that is quite effective, so we're looking to really improve that. The Peer Support Center, we're creating a promotional strategy for outreach. We're working with Student Experience on this, so if you don't know what the Peer Support Center is, I hope you do, but if you don't, we're going to try and do better by you to ensure that our campus is very aware, because it is a wonderful resource and very accessible to students, and we really want them to know that it's available for them. Additional to that, Battle of the Bands is every single month. We're going to be pushing out some promotional material on what that is and how students can get involved. And then we're going to be having a provincial Battle of the Bands at a conference that I went to in June. I opted to make Western the location for the provincials for Battle of the Bands, which is pretty cool. So it's going to be held at Western next semester. The menstrual donations have been doing really, really well. So it's an initiative that I implemented in the summer, and I'll show you a picture on the next slide in 1 second about what that's been looking like. All of the donations that we are getting, both at the Purple Store and in the the USC main office, are going to food support services. Women's leadership motion updates. I have that. So I'll provide just an update really, really quickly on that as soon as I'm done this slide, because we need to report back on the motion that Councillor Campbell put forward before I think the summer happened. So we've got our report back to council on that motion. I'll give that in a second. FIMS Arts and Music and the USC are hopefully going to be doing a concert in November. We were underway. We've been in the planning process for a little while. So look out on social media for that information. And additional to that, sexual violence education and prevention, constantly working on that. I'm going to be sitting on a committee with the Student Experience AVP in order to create actual actionable items on how to do sexual violence education in our community and how to make it accessible to students. So for the next slide, I'm just going to show, so this is the menstrual products donation box. I just took that about a few weeks ago, and that's how full it was, and we keep emptying it, and it keeps refilling, so we're really, really happy to see the community catching on to it this way. Social Science, VP Events, Mac actually reached out to me to take one of the boxes for one of the events that they're doing, so like it's really being spread around the community. That's absolutely wonderful, and as I said, all the donations proceeds are going to food support services right back to students, so really great initiative. Next to that, okay, so Councillor Campbell's motion was brought forward at female representation in the 2019-2020 elections. So I just wanted to review with you the process that we've been taken. So the USC executive had to report back on the findings as per what the motion detailed at the October council meeting. So here I am doing that. So essentially what happened was we had a report written up from Danny's associate Kat. So she wrote up a recommendation or a document, a research paper about women's involvement and women's leadership and barriers that women face when it comes to involvement, political involvement, leadership, etc. So then from that research paper, recommendations were created. I amalgamated the recommendations and I broke them off into 6 actionable next steps that we can take. And from those 6 actionable steps, I have separated them into 3 for now and 3 to do for later, so more long-term initiatives. So I just kind of explained them there. Right now, what we've got going on, and I can give a more detailed explanation if anybody in the questions would like me to, but for now, I'm going to just keep it short. So for the now period, which is hopefully going to be launched before January, so within this semester, we have multimedia initiatives and workshops that we're going to be providing. And then the long-term one for later is informational campaigns, experiential opportunities, which Women in House is actually one of them. It wasn't part of this motion, but it does kind of count as that. But we're looking to actually expand it into doing more experiential opportunities, so that's why it would be the later portion. Yeah, that is my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, cool. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So basically, what have I done so far? So one of the main things that I chose to focus on this past month has been Campus Trust. Some of you may know that is our healthcare trust system. So Western is one of the 12 schools that are part of the Campus Trust, and we have an entire system and governance structure there between the 12 schools where we elect trustees, and those trustees sit on a board, and that board makes decisions for the good of the entire trust. But each school has sort of a separate account, if you think about it, where we put our money there, and everything sort of functions through that. So that being said, so far I sort of got elected as chair of the 2 out of 4 committees of the Campus Trust. I am the chair of the Strategic Committee and the Governance Committee. The other 2 committees are the Communications Committee, which a Western person is already the chair. It's the Senior Manager of Human Resources, and the other committee is the Finance Committee, but yeah. And then I've also worked on creating yearly goals for both of those committees and for the trust in general, and so I presented those at the last board meeting of the trust. On top of that, I created a secretary email that is going to start a process of uploading everything on a Google Drive and having more of a culture of working through Google and collaboration between all the trust members. So that's really an exciting thing that's happening in this portfolio. So completed so far, I conducted a VP Finance roundtable earlier last week, I believe, and got a lot of good feedback and attendance. And I was part of the Women in House Selection Committee that Karina obviously led. I also did group and individual executive financial meetings where I went over the executive financials with everyone. We also passed the first round of administrative policy changes that you saw on the consent agenda with my governance associate. And we had our first Governance Revival Oversight Working Group meeting, and that was to discuss everything that I updated in my Governance Revival presentation. There's a creation of a Governance Oversight Working Group that includes members of board, council, and staff, and we had our first meeting of that to get an update and talk about the next steps. After that, there was the WUSC referendum review is ongoing, but we completed the report to Governance and Finance, the initial one, and a meeting with the WUSC representative. Hopefully we will have more information back to Governance and Finance to continue with that referendum called review. So, and to come. So we are still working on reviewing the bylaws, and hopefully by next semester we'll get some really good changes and updates on that. We also had, we're also going to do the club's financial literacy training. Karina already talked about that a little bit, but me and Declan are collaborating to provide kind of a secondary training session. Oh, and Mitch also mentioned that we are putting environmentally friendly mugs in the spoke for purchase, and I am in charge of selecting that mug and getting it out there. So that is really fun. And also, what else is to come is the referendum fee review working group recommendations to council. So the referendum fee review working group is meeting on Friday and discussing some of the items on their agenda, and then we're hopefully going to pass that soon, and they will be recommending things to council based on their review. So that is it. Any questions for me in my lovely portfolio? Okay, great.
Hello. I am going to start my presentation by just going down to the highlighted purple text, the USA survey. Hi. If you haven't seen this survey yet, fill it out. I will give everyone here a cookie if you fill it out. Thanks so much. It closes tonight at midnight. Oh, also, if you fill it out, you have a chance to win a rewards card, which is fun. If you want details about that, I can send you the rewards card. Cool. Thanks. Okay. So, first on my list of completed is the Orientation Week recap video. Goes out usually every year. You might have seen it on our Facebook page. The next thing is lock your fucking doors. Sorry. So that went out on our social as well, and we'll be releasing a winter edition to note that students should lock their doors before they head home for the winter break. For Purple Fest, I coordinated all the interviews with internal and external media. I was the chair of the promotions and sponsorship subcommittee, and there is a behind-the-scenes video that is in progress and will probably be used in the future. For Get At The Vote with Danny, this was for the municipal election. We released candidate profiles on our social media, and we also wrote a letter to the editor to the Gazette. And we also coordinated a bunch of different interviews with internal and external media. The next point is the student survey plan and implementation. So I'm working with my student feedback coordinator who's in the room. Hi, Callista. So we released a Purple Fest survey. We got a lot of traction on the Purple Fest survey. I believe over 500 responses were filled out. In general, students believe that we should invest in future programming. I can present a further presentation if you would all like at our next council meeting. We just get the results back until last Friday, or this past Friday. The next thing is agenda item briefings for PVP and key meetings with administration. Haunted Not Hungry, I prepped our different coordinators for interviews and prepared them with messaging. For the rotating campus office hours, all of the faculty presidents were contacted, and we have been visiting those different those buildings for the past semester. If your constituency hasn't been attended yet by our executive, it will be on the docket for next semester. The Week at a Glance is ongoing. We're going to be working out a new format for that, so stay tuned for that release. The media relations, that type of work that I'm doing is also ongoing, and we'll be seeing some exciting developments within the next month with a few different initiatives that the exec is working on. And the USC Foundation, I worked with the different executives and the board members to prepare them for a multitude of different interviews that they received. To come. So There is a display case outside of 340. Last year, the counselor photos were put up. We're going to look at implementing counselor photos, the title, as well as your email, so that people who are walking by and would like to contact you are able to do so. I believe most of you should have already taken a headshot for this purpose. If you have not taken your headshot, there will be one final opportunity on Friday from 1 to 2:30 in USC promotions. I'll post about that in the Facebook group as well, but make sure you get your photo taken, otherwise you will be blank. The next thing is the standard lease graphic that will be going out soon, just based on the fact that students are now going to be in the process of finding somewhere to live if they don't live on campus already, don't live off campus already. The next thing is the state of the USC. So that's Wednesday, November 7th from 5:30 to 7:30. We're going to have some pretty cool giveaways, and that event will be launched this Friday. So stay tuned for those giveaways and a bit more information about the state of the USC in general. Remembrance Day ceremony is November 12th. Like Karina said, it's from 10:30 to 11:30. So we'll have some pretty cool speeches at that. The next, the weekly briefing update I kind of touched on before, but basically changing the format of how we send out the weekly briefings so that it's more accessible to our student population. More surveys will be released, such as the Rec Center survey with Danny, our vice president, and a few different micro surveys that we'll be asking our students to fill out. The next thing is a Purple Fest recap video. I touched on that in the last slide. We're going to be releasing a USC animated video to kind of explain the organization and how we function. That will be posted on all of our social media, but especially our website to make it a little bit more clear. And the last thing is a video series and infographics in response to the female representation motion that Karina touched upon. So yeah. For the last 2 minutes, can everyone please fill out the USA survey? Thanks. Cool.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Next, we will have the report from the chair of the board of directors.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Angus Lai, and I'm the vice chair of this year's board of directors. Unfortunately, Rebecca couldn't be here today, so I'll be providing you with the board update. So in terms of the past board meeting that was held on October 1st, and during that board cycle, our finance subcommittee got to meet with our auditors, PwC. We sat through the presentation, we got to ask some questions, and we were confident with the financial statements. So at the board meeting, we approved the 2018 audited financial statements. In terms of our next board meeting, that will be this Friday, November 5th. At that meeting, we'll be approving the Q1 financial statements, and as well, we will be ratifying our new director. Coming from the summer, we had one director resign, so we've gone through the nominations process and hiring process, and we found the right candidate, so we'll be ratifying him. And as always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Rebecca. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Next, we will have the report from the chair of the student senators.
Hi guys, I walked up here just to say I don't really have any announcements. But, well, actually, our next Senate meeting is the 15th. A lot of faculty have been expressing interest that they want students to come out to this meeting and observe the meeting and just show support for faculty because of the contract negotiations and because of the freedom of expression debate.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we will have the reports from each of the standing committee chairs, starting with governance and finance.
All right, so hey guys, I'm Charles. One of the major things we've been working on in governance and finance is right now we have a bit of an issue where some of the motions that were passed by last year's council aren't covered by the, Andrea, what was the name of the policy manual? Sorry, they're not technically covered in the policy manual, and Based on the policy, they're technically not in effect, even though they were passed by the last council. So that's just something we're working on. And I know there's, again, the SPO ballot, whether or not it should be public. That's an issue that's been talked about quite a bit. So just out of respect for the previous council, we're going to be reintroducing the motion as it was passed by the previous council, but we will be introducing an amendment that everyone's been working on, especially Keen has been working really hard on it, that might potentially change it, and we'll sort of gauge support on the council floor about that. But for now, we're only going to be putting forward the one that was passed. First we're going to be putting forward the one that was passed by the last council, and then we'll be introducing this as an amendment. And besides that, there's just some small policy stuff we've been doing, getting rid of some outdated stuff. Besides that, yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we will have Advocacy Standing Committee.
Hey guys, quick update from your local ASC. First thing that we discussed at our most recent Advocacy Standing Committee was we had a bit of a presentation on Western's investment portfolio done by our very own Ariana, discussing sort of what students are talking about, as there's been an informal student group who's been really interested in what's going on. And we've also been looking into what Western's actually invested in, and there's some really interesting contradictions in the policy, being invested in tobacco while moving towards a smoke-free campus, etc. And so we decided that the best course of action would be to hear what the university's perspective is on this before we take any action. And so through Danny, we've invited Martin Belanger, who's in charge of Western's investment portfolio, to come to council to address us, to talk about the transparency behind Western's investment portfolio, as well as sort of share what his thoughts are to our council, just so that we're aware of anything before we do any actions. The next thing we discussed was the teaching quality paper that we all passed today. We thought it was great, had a couple pieces of feedback, but we definitely supported that, and we're glad it passed today. And then the third thing that we did in our last ASC meeting was regarding the Mature and Transfer Student Subcommittee. I just want to apologize to everyone for having that wording wrong on the motion that was in the agenda versus the one that was posted on Facebook. The reason that that got all confused is we were initially under the impression that we were only passing the motion through the standing committee and not to council, which is why a lot of that wording had to be changed when we brought it to council floor. But regardless, we're very excited that it did pass, and we're excited to get started on that committee. As I mentioned, we've already had an informal subcommittee meeting, and that one went really well. It was really eye-opening to hear a lot of the issues faced by some of these mature and transfer students. On that committee, there is myself, Jared, and it's actually chaired by Misha, who's not here, as well as the members of the community there. And so I look forward to bringing back some more of the findings of that committee, as well as some of the more substantive things that we'll work on in the coming years. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Thank you. And now we will have the Student Experience Standing Committee.
Today I discovered I can't breathe with that on. Okay. So at our last Student Experience Committee meeting, we passed that accessibility and inclusivity checklist that came to council today. I just want to reemphasize that it is not exhaustive nor a strict set of guidelines, and that it kind of went through, as Karina mentioned, last year's peer programs coordinators, this year's, plus all the Student Experience Committee. So we think it's kind of very robust, and that it has the things on it that it needs to have. If you'll recall, we are reviewing the early outreach program that has been slightly derailed because the early outreach coordinator has a concussion, but as soon as he is up and going again, we will get started on that again. We also decided at our last meeting we are also going to be reviewing the Public Arts Commission and Food Support Services. We haven't really gotten started on that yet, but if you have any feedback on that, you're more than welcome to reach out. And we're continuing our work on the halal and kosher food options being offered, as well as the free feminine hygiene products that Nicole kind of started. And we are in the very early stages of exploring a potential sort of weekend bus service to the GTA or other areas. That's in a very early stage. I don't really have anything beyond that to offer you right now, but if you have any thoughts or opinions on that, you're also welcome to reach out to myself or Cecilia, who's kind of the one behind that. And that's about all I have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we will have the Agenda and Council Operations Standing Committee. Hello. So we approved the agenda for this evening after a couple of changes. So we added the motion to ratify Daniel as the Deputy Speaker because he had just been hired that week. And then we also added in for discussion the Western University freedom of expression policy for discussion. And then we also removed the ad hoc in camera motion from the consent agenda and added it as its own motion in the for action under governance and finance. And then following those changes, we approved the agenda. Thank you. Okay, that is the end of our for information section of the agenda. We will now move on to our for discussion. We do have one item already on the agenda for discussion. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Councillor Maliogo.
I would just like to add and read a statement that was written by myself and my faculty regarding faculty negotiations.
Faculty negotiations, okay. I'll need a seconder for that motion to add that for discussion item. Councillor Kamenetsky. All those in favor of adding faculty negotiations as a for discussion item? Okay, that is 2/3 of council. So that will be added following our freedom of expression policy. Any other items for discussion to be added? Okay, we will go ahead then with the Western University Freedom of Expression Policy from President Pratt.
Hello? Okay. Mr. Pratt, USC President. So I really wanted to introduce this account to floor today because, as I said, it is a draft policy at this point in time. And any concerns raised by council in terms of your constituents speaking to you or your faculty council speaking to you upon this policy, I just wanted to make sure that we as student leaders do our due diligence in ensuring that this policy is representative, I think, of our university and our university community. And it's tough for me as a sole undergraduate representative to represent 29,000 diverse and different experiences on this campus. So I really want to have an exhaustive discussion upon the policy itself. And I say upon the policy itself because I really would like to keep debate and discussion around wording and clauses within the policy and not any kind of ideological debate upon the principle of freedom of expression itself, if I may. So yes.
Okay, Councillor Maliogo.
So I'm actually just going to read a statement. We developed a working group on our council around this policy, and some wonderful people on my council put out a survey, and we got over 90 student responses to that survey, and then they kind of wrote this little summary of their the students' responses. To whom it may concern, USC. After careful review of the most recent edition of the university's Freedom of Expression policy, the Faculty of Information and Media Studies Student Council has constructed a short list of critiques and suggestions to allow the policy to best address the opinions of our student body. All suggestions are based off of 90 student responses to a survey we distributed. With regards to paragraph 6, we feel that the use of the word reasonable is fairly vague for the context it pertains to. Due to the fact that people have different opinions of what reasonably could be defined as, we feel that it would be beneficial to clearly define what this means by reasonable use of university facilities. With regards to this paragraph, we received multiple responses about the display of graphic posters from pro-life groups as a clear example of what some may consider to be reasonable when organizing or protesting. We believe that it would be beneficial to define this for those purposes. Our second edition comes directly from a speech that USC President Mitch Pratt gave to our council When speaking on the subject of the policy, Mr. Pratt said that controversial ideas should not come at the expense of student safety. Our council passionately endorses this statement and feels it is important that it be added in some form. We also believe that it is important to add some short subsection to the policy, expanding on and exemplifying the resources available to protect students who may be negatively impacted by controversial opinions on campus. By having these resources directly in the document, we hope it makes it easier for students to access them. In addition to the previously stated comments of the existing policy, PHMSSC would like to call your attention to two specific responses to our faculty-wide survey. The first was an overwhelming desire for the university to have a clear stance as to when or if they would not allow someone to speak on campus. Secondly, when asked to define hate speech, a student wrote, "Any action that degrades, dehumanizes, or dismisses someone or a certain group." We feel that this statement reflects our faculty's values extremely well and could be a beneficial addition to the school's policy. Overall, the PHMSSC would like to commend the committee for their efforts to create this revised addition to the policy. We hope that our concerns can be of help to you as you continue working towards completing a policy that best represents Western as a whole. Thanks kindly, Faculty of Information and Media Studies, Students' Council.
Okay. Would anyone else like to add to this discussion? Councillor Lawler?
Kieran Lawler, Social Science Counselor. Just a question for you, Mitch. How does this policy kind of compare to other universities and like the drafts that they've come out with? And like, is there anything significantly different? Is it just very similar?
So we actually had a large OWL document consisting over 150 pages of other schools' policies, ranging from everywhere from, I know the provincial government listed in their mandate the Chicago principles to the U of T policy, I believe that was struck in 1992, McMaster, Laurier, Oxford. There's many best practices we can look at other universities for this, and I'd like to clearly stipulate that the purpose of these policies are more so roadmap policies. They're kind of your overarching sense of what the community standards for freedom of expression at a university is, and I think that inherently a university community is based upon the principles of freedom of expression as well too. So there is already a lot of pre-existing policies at the university dealing with this that operationalize what is stated within this policy itself.
Councillor Hollenberg?
Joshua Hollenberg, the law counselor. I'd like to commend President Pratt and the working group that put this together on the well-written nature of this policy. I think it does a really good job balancing a lot of competing interests and rights of students. The right on the one side of expression, of speech, of proposing controversial ideas and of feeling safe, safe to do so, while also recognizing the rights of students to not be exposed to hate, to violence, to incitement. I had a discussion with Professor Patel, a law professor who was one of the primary drafters of this, and a lot of effort went into putting this together, and I think it really shows that. I think that policies by their nature need to be somewhat vague. They need to be applicable to a wide range of circumstances, both anticipated and unanticipated, and I really appreciate that. And just very quickly on the definition of hate speech, it was defined by the Supreme Court of Canada in a case called R. and Keegstra. And so that has obviously worked into the policy. So I think there are very good, clear demarcations about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And so I could not be more impressed with how this turned out. So thank you very much.
Okay, any other discussion on this topic? President Pratt?
Thank you, Councillor Hallberg, for your comments. I would also like to add, stipulated it within the provincial mandate itself, that this policy is to be reviewed annually. So please, I ask you as fellow student leaders to cast a critical eye, maintain critical thinking upon university policies of this nature, and always strive to think about how we can improve it together for the betterment of our students and for their undergraduate experience.
Any other discussion on this topic? Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to our second for discussion, faculty negotiations, led by Councillor Maliogo.
So again, everything I'm reading here was drafted in part with my entire faculty as well as general members, so not just our faculty, although you will notice I made a few adjustments. The purpose of the USC is to advocate for students, full stop. I ask Council this: what is more important than using our platform, our influence, and our direct line to university administration to advocate for and ensure the quality of education for the students with which we represent? The issues being negotiated currently will affect teaching quality, class sizes, and academic freedom of faculty members, which will affect students not just this year, but for many years to come. As it was clearly, I attempted to provide resources on these issues by distributing the flyers, which have now been removed. And I value the feedback that this may have created a perception of bias, but I also believe that as free-thinking counselors within a political body, we all have the capacity to engage with information produced by UOFA and actually have a duty to engage with this information and then decide for ourselves what we believe in. The issues outlined in these flyers will all directly impact the quality of education for all students, the people with which we represent. It is my belief that neutrality does not exist in this scenario. Not saying anything is a political position. Neutrality sides with power, and the university holds all the power in these negotiations. Students fund approximately 55% of the university's operating budget, and yet in this scenario have no official avenue with which to advocate for the quality of their education in these negotiations. Should this not be the job of the USC? While I recognize that it was not this council which voted on this neutrality policy, I would like to ask this year's council to think critically about whether they feel this is truly in the best interest of students. I'm not asking for the USC to engage in direct action, to picket administration's offices, or to make a big scene. I am merely asking the USC to see faculty negotiations for what they are, an opportunity to ensure that faculty are able to support their students meaningfully. I completely hear and understand the worry that taking sides may alienate the USC from administration. But being a political body, that is the line we must constantly toe. Advocating for the quality of students' education can be done respectfully and with nuance. This is an issue that matters, and if it means risking an uphill battle on other issues with admin, it is a risk I believe we should take. Our students deserve it. In short, I do not understand what the point of the USC is if not to advocate for the systemic support of students in their educational endeavors here at Western.
Would anyone like to add to this discussion? Councillor Liu.
Cecilia Liu, music president. So while I don't have a properly drafted speech on behalf of my council, I think we talk a lot about wellness resources here at the University Students' Council and also on the level of the Faculty of Music as well. We've seen lots of wellness weeks in the past month, and we talk about mental wellness resources and mental health on this campus. However, I mean, just seeing from social media and seeing from, like, personally on the Western Class of 2019 Facebook group, one of the #1 stressors that students are facing right now is their confusion about this faculty negotiation and the possibility of a strike, especially for graduating students and students in first year that may not know exactly what is going on. I don't believe that as a University Students' Council right now, we're providing students with the right resources and pointing them in the right direction so that they can make a decision. On this discussion of neutrality, I'm not entirely sure where I lie yet. However, we're not pointing students in the right direction to be able to access the information for them to develop their own opinions and for them to side on whichever side they choose. So yeah, thanks.
Councillor Hollenberg.
Joshua Hollenberg, Law Counselor. I fully agree that the USC needs to advocate for students. That was the thrust of the policy that we passed in January of this year. I believe that advocating for students means that we need to engage with both sides. We need to be able to walk into the offices of UOFA and of the administration and be taken seriously by both sides. This is simply not possible if one side sees us, either rightly or wrongly, as working with the other side. They will be cagey, they will be recalcitrant, they will not accept us as acting in good faith and for good reason. The teachers of this university have an advocate, a very strong one, their union. We must advocate on behalf of the students and not duplicate the efforts of the union. We should forcefully encourage the peaceful resolution should a strike occur, and we should provide information to our students as to how the negotiations are unfolding. That is a step that we've already begun taking at Western Law. But I think that to go beyond those steps will be to insert ourselves into a process between two parties which are highly sophisticated and have a very long-term and positive relationship. As noted, there's never been a strike of Western faculty. To insert ourselves into this negotiation, I believe, would be to destabilize that relationship with very little upside and significant potential downside as to our relationship to work with both sides of this current dispute.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to this discussion? Councillor Ma?
Charles Moss, social science counselor. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Hollenberg had just said. While I do think it's a fair point that if in a kind of a hypothetical scenario, if we were to somehow generate some kind of input in this process, it could be seen as a way to represent the interests of students. But I'm just sort of curious what kind of specific impact that we might be looking for here if we're advocating trying to insert ourselves into this, again, as was mentioned, very sophisticated process. These are trained negotiators. And while we are student leaders, I don't think that we're necessarily at that level. And I think we would just exacerbate an already really complicated situation. So this is more of a question to sort of what kind of things do you think we would be bringing to the table if we inserted ourselves into this situation?
I think this may also stem from maybe a clarification as to what neutrality means. What I mean is being able to go to administration and say, hey, students are actually worried about the fact that these negotiations may increase the class sizes. We're worried that our professors won't have the ability to give us the attention that we deserve because they're being spread too thin and they're not being paid properly. I'm not saying that, the USC should be going, we think that the university is horrible and we stand unequivocally with the union, but saying, hey, these are the issues that the union is bringing up that will directly impact students, and we believe that as representing the students, we support UOFA on these particular points. And I think that there is a way to play balance in all of that. And I think one thing that I would like to know is that there was a strike in 2011 where all the librarians striked that are under UOFA. So just for clarification.
Councillor Yee?
I would just like to 2 points. So firstly, referencing the policy passed last year, it actually does specify that the USC in labor disputes has an obligation to provide notify students as soon as possible potential ramifications of labor disputes following an affirmative strike vote or application for lockout. So this is something that USC should be doing. So providing clarity is something already within our mandate, and if it's not being done currently, it should be done. And secondly, as faculty presidents, we've gone out and we've met with the deans. So I'm not necessarily taking a stance on either side of this, but I would just like to provide council with some of the information I received from the Dean of Science. So these collective bargaining negotiations, a lot of what comes out is a lot of political cards, a lot of trying to play their best hand to get the best negotiation outcome for their side. The reference of the strike that happened in 2011 with the librarians, it's not the librarians that we see. The Dean of Science told me it's essentially 10 professors and archivists who serve as librarians in their role, but they are not the ones who are front desk staff. They're not the ones that students directly interact with. Every single collective bargaining agreement at Western has ended with an agreement on both sides. And at the faculty council meeting, which I attended, where science discussed this collective bargaining agreement, what was brought up by the representative from science, Dr. McDougall-Shackleton, was a lot of what they were looking for regarding wage raises compared to other universities like Guelph, Queens, McMaster. Western's faculty are paid 7 to 11% less than those professors. The school ran $140 million surplus roughly. And so a lot of what they want is looking at tenure, looking at these pay raises. and issues surrounding that. So those are the facts of this negotiation that I was able to obtain from my faculty. Again, whether or not council decides that what policy we passed last year should stand or should not, or if we should actually insert ourselves into this process, I don't want to take a side on that for now, but just simply providing the context that I understand.
Councillor Macaulay?
Well, I'd just like to look back at the policy that I think is somewhat under contention from last year, and I think that it does get at the point that, Ariana, you're bringing up, because it discusses and talks about how the executive is supposed to maintain open lines of communication with both sides, and I think the intention behind it was to not isolate relationships, but it wasn't to take the USC out of engagement in these processes. It was to ensure that the student voice is heard, but not necessarily deciding that one side of the agreement would better represent students, but just to, as it says, maintain clear and open communication with both the administrative personnel and the representatives from the involved union, and make sure that students are kept in mind. And so I think maybe if the executive from this year can talk about how they're holding true to this policy and whether they are making sure that they're being engaged in this process and advocating on behalf of students, that could help with this discussion.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And so we currently do have like a graphic that we have ready to kind of go out about information. However, we know that negotiations are still going on, and totally understand the point about clearing up some concerns around maybe some unclarity about some of the information. But we do know that those negotiations are still going on, and we won't really have an update until I believe the last update said there was about 8 full negotiations to go through. And so even earlier on our Instagram today, we kind of engaged about a question that we received about any updates, and again we reiterated that there's still 8 kind of full negotiations to go forward. And I think later on we'll be posting some information related to the full timeline of exactly how everything happened, but we won't be able to fully engage until we know the outcome of some of these negotiations. As Councillor Hollenberg said, that is underway by some highly trained professionals who know exactly what they're doing in relations to these instances. And in our kind of back and forth with stakeholders at the university, we have been sure to raise up the concerns that we want to make sure that students are as affected as little as possible as to whatever outcomes may occur from any of the negotiations. And so for us, that's kind of been our approach to things, and we plan to get that information out as soon as possible.
Okay. Councillor Lawler?
Kieran Lawler, Social Science Councillor. My points are just kind of echoing a few things that have already been said. I do understand, obviously, the importance for neutrality within the USC, because as like a body which has to work with a lot of different groups, like it does make a lot of sense for us to not try and get on the bad side of any of them. But I also do believe also strongly believe in some of the comments that Councillor Malioko made. While I do think that students should have somewhat of a voice in these negotiations, while not like necessarily taking a side, I do believe like essentially what the policy was talking about. I wasn't fully aware of that, but like I think that is a very important thing that the executive should be focusing on. Is obviously there are very valid points from both sides of the negotiations, and both sides I'm sure have points that apply strongly to students and the effects that these negotiations will have on us. So I really hope and encourage the executive to continue doing what they're doing about getting student voices into these negotiations and having them be a consideration. And then just also as student leaders, I think outside of our roles here in this council, I think just as kind of student leaders on this campus, I think we should all be getting out and educating ourselves about these issues, and perhaps just spreading information, helping other students to understand more about what's going on in these negotiations, how it'll affect them. And like even just like outside of our roles as counselors, I think it's just important that all students be aware of sort of these things that are happening on these campus and what how they could affect them.
Councillor Tasha?
I'm TJ, Huron president. So I'm not sure if I'm necessarily the best person to speak towards the negotiations that are happening on main campus, because at Huron we do have separate faculty negotiations and a separate faculty union. But the way that it's done at Huron is that as a student government, we are able to not necessarily insert ourselves in negotiations, although we would be allowed to, but we are free to take sides or take positions on negotiations. And I think what Councillor Marlioka was saying is really important, is that this can be done with nuance. It doesn't need to be we stand unequivocally on one side or the other, and it doesn't need to be that the position you take alienates the other side. There's ways of bringing up policies and ideas without making yourself a bad guy to either side, but just looking like a champion of student issues. And so I think that we should consider that when we think about how we're interacting with various members of administration and the faculty union, is that being dead in the center, no opinion, is not necessarily the only way to keep people happy.
Councillor Sawyer.
I guess first I just had a question. Did we set a time limit on this discussion, or?
No, we did not.
No, okay. I'd like to motion to limit discussion to 5 more minutes.
Okay, I'll look for a seconder for that. Councillor Hollenberg, all those in favor of 5 more minutes? Okay, that motion passes. And on that note, would anyone like to add to this discussion further? Councillor Hollenberg?
I must say I really appreciate the tenor and the tone of this discussion. It's been, I think, a very positive one that's bringing a lot of good issues to light. I'd like to reiterate some of the points I've heard about the role of students. I think that we do have a very important role to play, in a negotiation setting. I think the important thing, though, is to be seen as a neutral third party, advocating not on behalf of administration, not on behalf of the union, but on behalf of the students, raising issues that students raise with both sides. I think there is a role for our executive to do that. I think the important thing, again, though, is that we are able to have that good faith, clear line of dialogue with both sides of this discussion, both sides of this negotiation. As was mentioned, these are highly trained professionals. We should encourage them to do their jobs. We should encourage them to reach a quick resolution. We should maintain the best interest of the students, but those should be seen as, I think, somewhat separate from the best interest of either specific side.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we will close discussion. Any new business that the council would like to bring to council at this time? Okay, seeing none, just before we terminate, I just wanted to wish you all a happy Halloween. I hope you enjoy whatever festivities you may partake in this evening. Also, please take some more candy when you return your placards and your clickers. Oh, just one more thing before we end.
The sweater orders.
Enough said.
And cookies.
There you go. I will look for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Danesi, Councillor Sun, all those in favor of terminating the meeting. Keep your placards up, otherwise we're not going to end. Okay, the meeting is now terminated. Happy Halloween.